Welcome to Across the Dietary Universe, a podcast where we bring experts along our voyage to discover the secrets of food and how it relates to each of our unique dietary profiles. From the origins of diets to current eating trends to the frontier of food innovation and the future of how we eat, we'll discover that when it comes to food, things are not necessarily as they seem. Honeycomb is a mobile app that works with your iPhone or Android device to help you find suitable food to eat at restaurants near you based on your specific dietary requirements. If you're plant-based and celiac, low Fodmap with a tree nut allergy, keto and dairy-free, we support countless dietary combinations and profiles. Based on your inputs, Honeycomb curates the best restaurants for you and the best options to order at those restaurants. If you have more severe allergies, don't worry. Honeycomb only recommends you places that have a clear protocol to deal with cross-contamination. Pre-order Honeycomb today at get.honeycomb.ai. Okay, Alison, it is a pleasure to see you. It's so good to have you on the podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
Alison Marras, also known as Food by Mars, is a nutritional therapy practitioner and recipe creator who believes in healing your body with real food. After dealing with chronic health conditions, Alison used holistic nutrition and specific diets, including Paleo and AIP, which is autoimmune protocol, to put her conditions into remission. She now helps thousands of people feel better by eating better and by sharing her knowledge on her blog, social media, and her new book. Alison, so nice to have you. I'm so excited to get into the nitty-gritty here.
Thank you. I'm really stoked too.
There's so many places to start, and the first question that I have is, okay, Mars, is that short for your last name? Is that a nickname that people call you?
Yes, I know. That's always everybody's questions when they're like interviewing me. They're like, well, which one's your name? And yeah, it's basically just a nickname for Marras is Mars. Okay. And, I was feeling the like celestial vibes when I started the blog. So I was like, let's do this. This is cute.
Okay, I like it. I like the celestial vibes. Mars, very powerful. Elon Musk is probably a fan.
I'm sure, yeah.
So what I want to jump into, and for me and for the listeners, I think they'll probably know, I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis a few years back, and that was a big, that was a big shift in my life because I went from eating everything to getting diagnosed, then going to the hospital, and it took me 3 months to get out of the house. I talked to dietitians, got the laundry list, do's and don'ts, low FODMAP diet, the whole works. And I created my company Honeycomb because I just wanted to, make an impact and make it easier for people. And it just seems since I've been diagnosed, this is more and more and more awareness. And the more awareness there is, you realize there's a lot of people who are struggling out there for a variety of things. And so, when I heard about you and I took a look at what you're doing, it was all very, 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 very interesting. And I always get this warm feeling that thank you, people, for doing this and trying to get it out into the forefront and helping a lot of people. So I want to know your story first and foremost. And maybe if you want to give a quick introduction, I did intro you, but if you'd like to give me your story and just jump into like the trigger that actually brought you into holistic nutrition. And you sort of wrote it beautifully on your website, but for the listeners, can you just walk us through the story of how you became Food by Mars?
Yeah, absolutely. And I also just have to say thank you too, because I love what you're building and it's so needed. As a foodie myself, obviously having a food blog, I always loved eating out at restaurants. And much like you, my trigger really came when I had my diagnosis. I would say it came a little bit before then when I didn't even know what was wrong with me and I was searching for my diagnosis. Right. And I was kind of getting cast aside by normal or Western medicine primary care doctors that were kind of just like, oh, I don't know, you're aging or you're this or you're that. And I was like, well, I'm 27, so I don't think I should be having all these problems. My hair was falling out. I was having all these reactions to foods. I think I always struggled with hormonal imbalances and digestive issues for sure, but I just normalized it. I thought like, oh, everyone's always exhausted and everyone, can't go to the bathroom, right? Or whatever it was. Uh,
Are you saying
and
there's a way not to be exhausted anymore?
yeah, that's actually not the norm. Can you believe it?
It's hard for me to believe, but we'll see what you have to say.
I know, right? You're like, all right, I'll entertain that.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of, I was working in startups in New York City. I was climbing the corporate ladder. I was doing all these things and kind of just shoving my own health aside. And the symptoms just started getting louder and louder and louder. Like I said, hair falling out, the works.
Wow.
And it just became impossible to ignore. And it was really upsetting and affecting my day-to-day life. For anyone who's familiar with Yelp, I was a Yelp elite. So
Wow.
corny, but
Oh my
so
God.
it was very prestigious at the time.
That's very prestigious.
But that is how much I loved going out to eat and trying new
Wow.
restaurants and doing happy hour and being social and all that stuff. And so it was pretty devastating when I couldn't even tolerate going out to eat after a while. Everything was upsetting me. I felt like I was hung over after a sip of wine or a burger or whatever it was for a week. And so I just started feeling like I was being really held back. So kind of cut to the chase, 3 years of that or so. And I finally got diagnosed by a naturopath with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune disease. So similar to your autoimmune disease, where the body is essentially, as far as we know, attacking something in the body.
Right.
And, that can be really devastating as well to hear, as you know, because it's crazy to hear that your body is, attacking itself. And the good thing that came out of it was at least I had direction and I knew what was going on. But then that sort of opened up this whole new world, just like you said. Now you're getting all these diets handed to you and medication and treatment options and all these other things. So that was really my trigger. And all along I had been documenting changing my food, going gluten-free, going dairy-free, the whole journey. And then ultimately, after a combination of my own health struggles and watching my own family struggle so much with cancer and autoimmunity and all these other things, I was like, you know what? No one else in my circle, in my world, knows what the heck to do about this. And I don't want to live this way. So I'm going to go back to school. I'm going to, study nutrition and help other people so that they don't have to go through this.
Wow.
And that's how it came to be.
So something that I thought was interesting is that the traditional doctors didn't really help you much.
Correct.
Can you walk me through that? Because in my personal story, I had a GI and they just, they were able to diagnose. But I know for so many people, there's no diagnosis. You just end up with like a generic, IBS or something.
Right.
And so what made you make the leap into sort of holistic nutrition in terms of going that direction for a diagnosis?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think, there's some people that it's like, quote unquote, that you're lucky enough to get the diagnosis quicker. But really all that meant is that you fell into their bucket.
Right.
Whatever labs or results that you came back with fell into a reference range that worked in their favor to say like, oh yeah, you have this.
Right.
For me, I was going to endocrinologists. A lot of people were like, you should check your thyroid because it sounds like thyroid. A lot of people were saying that. My own family, different practitioners, acupuncturists, random people that I was seeing. But every time I'd go to get it checked by the top endocrinologist in New York City, sorry, everything looks fine. I guess you're aging. I guess you're stressed. I guess you're this. I guess you're that. And it just made me feel really like, well, what is this in my head? Like, what's going on?
Right.
But I knew my body, something was not right. I knew so many things were going wrong and I had to keep investigating. So that's what my symptoms are really what kept me going. It was like, no, this is still a problem.
Right.
I have to keep looking. Yeah, I'm not crazy. I have to keep looking. So really what that was is a story of me not falling into their tests, into their reference ranges, which unfortunately in a lot of ways is out of date. They only, for my case, for the thyroid, were only testing TSH. And even after I had done my own research and asked them to test more things like antibodies, that's really key for autoimmune. They were never checking me for autoimmune disease.
Really?
So they were just like, okay, we'll check your thyroid. Oh, it looks fine. And that was it. So, the problem there is labs are a snapshot in time. That day, it could not be exactly where it needs to be to warrant a diagnosis. And if you don't have someone who's willing to dig much deeper, into more root cause things, you're going to run into issues. So by me digging and then really getting interested in this and going back to school, it started clicking like, oh, I can't keep going to these doctors. They're not giving me the answers I needed. So finally, once I went to a naturopath and then also a functional medicine doctor, which for anyone who doesn't know is usually an MD or a DO, and they were trained Western medicine, but then
Right.
they sought out more training to get more
Right.
integrative, holistic. So they are kind of like the full package. And so by doing that, I got my diagnosis. It was very clear and easy because they
Wow.
ran the proper labs
Right.
and their reference ranges. That's the other key. They're not just looking to see that you fall in this reference range. They also want to make sure it's optimal. So I always like to say to people, do you want a D or do you want an A?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, you still passed with a D, but that's a very different student than an A, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So that's kind of how I like to present it, is if you don't get a copy of your labs when you go to doctors, if you are uninformed as to what it should be optimal,
Right.
it's just not going to cut it. It's not good enough.
So you took your
To hear
destiny,
from someone.
you took your destiny into your own hands. You didn't let
Totally.
traditional because unfortunately a lot of people just end up, they get that answer from the doctor and they're not satisfied with it, but they just accept it that they're never going to have an answer. And
Absolutely.
as part of your mission, I guess, showing that people can get an answer.
Absolutely. To keep going, keep digging, trust yourself. If you know something is not right with your body, you have to keep going.
And so you became after that, and you obviously figured out what was suitable for your body. How did you figure out? How did you go from diagnosis to health, like optimal health?
It's a journey. And I think, with chronic illness, it's always kind of hanging around
Yeah.
and flare-ups can happen. And
Right.
so knowing that there's no magic pill, there is no destination that you can kind of reach. I certainly had goals and benchmarks. I wanted to be in remission, so I didn't want my antibodies to be detectable, or at least to be very, very low. And I wanted to get pregnant really badly, which is
Right.
difficult with Hashimoto's and PCOS, which is another condition that I always struggled with.
Right.
And luckily, I would say my optimal health came when I did go into remission and I was able to get pregnant and have a healthy pregnancy and a healthy baby. So
That's
that for
amazing,
me
by
was
the way.
like,
That story is
thank you.
amazing, and congratulations, because that probably meant the world to you.
Thank you. It really did. And now I have a 2-year-old. So I can't even believe it, but 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
And it was so validating as well to the journey that I'd been on. So to answer your question, I would say it was really a mixture of diet, lifestyle, but to weave that all together, because those are kind of big words. It sounds like, oh, okay, whatever. Tell me what diet to go on and tell
Right.
me what lifestyle tweaks to make, but it's hard. It's
Yeah.
not easy. Like I said, I was restaurants and happy hours and lots of stress working in New York City and doing crazy hours
Right.
and having all these high
What were
expectations.
the biggest, what were the worst bad habits, I guess, that you had to like pull out
Kick.
kick, all of that?
Yeah, I think the hardest, yes, okay, there was food. Food was maybe hard, but I was optimistic about it and
Okay.
found, if you look at my blog, I find ways to make things really
Right.
delicious and you won't even know that they're paleo or gluten
Right.
free or whatever. So that I feel like I found fun with and
Mhm.
peace with. I think one of the hardest things was, and this is where you come in, definitely being social,
Right.
restaurants. How do I had a lot of clients, like business clients and things like that I would be taking out, and I'd be like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Like, I don't know what I can eat.
Mm.
It was just very stressful. And then also even just hanging out with your friends that are just like, come on, you used to always eat that. Like, why can't you eat that? Or why can't we go out to happy hour anymore? And so I did find that just by nature of me not putting myself in those situations as much, I kind of lost touch with some people that I did care about and everything, but
Mm.
that was what we mostly had in common. And that's what we would do together. And so that kind of fizzled out, I guess. But so that was probably a challenge. And then the other one was really stress management. And that's still something that I'm always working on, but that's huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, you're in business, and that's a tough one for everyone. And stress, I found for colitis personally, I remember one guy once upon a time, he said, if you mix dairy with stress, it's like pouring gasoline on a fire.
That's a great
Um,
saying.
and I was like, that's exactly it, because, I find that I can sometimes cheat in little pockets. And so let's say I'll have like, dairy, but then I'm not stressed. because maybe I'll
Yeah.
be like on a trip, so I'm less stressed, so I'll have dairy, but then and then maybe I'll have a bit of alcohol. But if the trifecta for me is like if I have a drink and if I have dairy and if I am stressed and then if I miss one of my like taking my pills, 'cause I take pills to like help
Yeah.
manage, then it's just like game over.
Perfect storm.
Yeah, perfect storm. I think we all kind of know what creates our perfect storm, and it's probably not one thing that's going to tear down, the entire house, but before you know it, it can very like within a few days probably, right? It can all come crashing down if you're not on top of it. Would you agree?
Absolutely. It's kind of like that bucket. Like you keep filling it up with drips and drops of water, and
Right.
eventually it's going to get full and tip over. And that's really what we have to think about. Sometimes people will often say to me, similar to what you were just saying, like, but I had it yesterday and I was fine. How come today?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what was the environment? Were you stressed? Is it because of a cumulative, like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, you had it, and now Friday, full on flare up? So oftentimes with food sensitivities, inflammation, the poison is in the dose. We can handle some stress. We can handle some dairy. We can, whatever it is for you, but the amount is where it gets tricky. And I feel like in our modern day lives, we tend to be very much like using the same thing over and over again, whether it's food, whether
Right.
it's a bad habit of being stressed out and not managing it over and over again. We just tend to keep staying in our lane that way. And we have to zoom out and really realize that and switch things up.
I like that. Ladies and gentlemen, the poison is in the dose. That's a great
Exactly.
saying. Okay, so how long did it take you from to get into remission the first time?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say from diagnosis to remission, I want to say maybe a year and a half to 2 years.
Okay.
Mainly because so I was messing with diets and I was also trying to find a good dose of my medication. So I do take the thyroid medication every morning, and we started like pretty low and slow. We experimented with some other things. There's this thing called low dose naltrexone. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but sometimes people with SIBO or different gut
Okay.
issues will go on that.
Okay.
I dealt with a lot of SIBO. I dealt with a lot of infections, parasites, all the things, because when you start working with holistic doctors, they don't just say, oh, okay, here's your diagnosis and here's your medicine, bye. No, they say, why did you get this? And they keep digging. And it can be overwhelming for some people to take on, but I was like, yeah, let's dig. Like,
Right.
let's figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's when you start to find like, oh, you have all these other things, gut infections, adrenal issues, like whatever. And so you kind of have to go through that whole process.
Right.
So I would say that's probably how long it took. And one of the biggest linchpins for me was when I left my former career. I had been straddling the nutrition and food with my former career for a long time. I was scared to kind of make the big leap. And once I did that and I had been working through just healing, I went and got my blood test and it was like it never happened.
Wow.
And I was like, wow. And that's why I always have to bring up stress. And I know it's so nebulous and everyone's like, well, whatever, I can't do that. All I'm going to say is like, okay, but then don't ever say you haven't tried everything, because that is a really big deal. And it certainly was for me.
And so a lot of the stress you said came from your previous career, which is you were involved in startups.
Yeah, I was working for like marketing tech startups, and it was fun and it was great, and I did that for a long time. But I think it was that, yes, that was stressful, but then also me having two careers basically at the same time, that was stressful. And knowing that this was my passion, nutrition, wellness, food, helping people not go through all the stuff that I went through, was my real passion, and that I was too scared to move off of it. And of course there's other stuff, right? Everyone has baggage that they carry around, and you have to look at all of that.
So you became a nutritional therapy practitioner. And is that the official title for because in Canada here, I don't know if it's different in the States, but there are dietitians and there's nutritionists. Is that more like a nutritionist?
Exactly.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. In the US, it's the same, like where you have the registered dietitians. And they're going through more like the mainstream sort of training and everything. And then nutritionists can kind of be an umbrella and several different things underneath it. And so the Nutritional Therapy Practitioner program was amazing for me because it was very much like just going back to our roots as humans. How did we eat? How did we practice? It was very well-rounded lifestyle food, how to prepare food properly. There was a big emphasis on the cooking and preparation of the food, which was wonderful. So
Do you think
yeah,
we ate healthier way back in the day?
yeah, because we didn't have processed foods. Like if
Right.
you go back before processing foods,
Yeah.
things were just so different, you know, and it wasn't that long ago. And so even though we think it was, because it wasn't in our lifetime and
Right.
even in
How
our
long?
parents.
How long ago do you think were we
So
generally healthy with regard to food? With regard to food.
uh, I want to say, so something that we go through in the education program is you kind of see the pivotal timeline of how things changed. So there were several changes.
Right.
And I think the agricultural revolution, which was forever ago, that was when we started living in
Yeah.
homes
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
having cows and dogs and whatever.
Right.
That was the first sort of, if I'm remembering right, that was the first sort of change.
Right.
Then I would say when things really started changing, because at that point now we didn't have to hunt as much, so we didn't have to move as much, but
Right.
we were still farming and gathering, and so there was still some element of that.
Mm-hmm.
But then there was the Industrial Revolution. Then I think the biggest issue was once big food companies and sugar exploded. And here's the thing, that like that kind of all happened around World War II-ish era. And so people were starving because it was a wartime, and people were hungry and people were on the street, and we were trying to feed a lot of people. And so that's when these
Right.
food production companies started coming about. And so it was a good cause. There was a good reason
Right.
to, as often there is when we humans decide to invent something.
Yeah.
It's just that the drawback was like, oh, now we're pumping everyone full of margarine. This is actually better. Then it's better for our bottom line. So we're going to go with this and say that this is healthy, and butter is no longer, and
Right.
lard is not healthy anymore. And so this is when things started being skewed because of whether it was making people money, because it was easier or cheaper to produce, whatever. And it wasn't necessarily factual or based in reality.
Right.
And so we started eating things that were foreign to our body. They're not natural. And that's when I think inflammation, food sensitivities, all these things became much
Right.
broader, right? And front and center for us, but we just didn't know what was going on.
Right. I mean, it seems that we're, as a society trying to move as fast as humanly possible with almost everything that we do. And, we're starting to, if we haven't already, we definitely in the midst of paying the price for it, probably more than anyone else in history. And I want to get into that later on in the podcast. But for now, I'm really curious to know, how did you end up, because you obviously have the entire gamut of, as a nutritional therapy practitioner. I'm so used to saying nutritionist. I don't want to.
You can say that. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. You have sort of everything available to you. You know what's there. You decided on paleo and and AIP. How did you end up on those and not like low FODMAP, for example?
Yeah. So, well, low FODMAP is, and I've done low FODMAP, but it is temporary.
Right.
That is not a way to live,
Right.
because you're going to be missing out on really key nutrients
Right.
from different plant sources. For
Right.
example, cauliflower. I couldn't live without cauliflower that
Right.
long, because once I went gluten-free and dairy-free, it was like, well, cauliflower becomes everything
Right.
after a while.
Yeah. Very true.
So little things like that. So I've tried a lot of different diets, including low FODMAP, but again, that was just temporary and it was not sustainable. It was very hard to travel with. So it did what it did. It helped me manage some symptoms for
Okay.
SIBO and things like that. But ultimately, any elimination diet you do, like low FODMAP or whatever, the idea is you remove while you're healing.
Right.
So while you're either seeking treatment with a practitioner, if you have to address infections by doing antibiotics, herbal or pharmaceutical or whatever, or simply really increasing your nutrient density, bone broths, fermented foods, liver and other organ meats and offal. So that heals your body, that heals your gut. And so that's the idea. The problem, and where we get it wrong a lot, is we just Google, we find out about an elimination diet, or a doctor gives us a handout. It's like, here, low FODMAP for you. And
Right.
we never follow up. We never know, well, when do I reintroduce?
Right.
How do I know it's okay to reintroduce? do I just live this way? And of course you don't. And of course it sucks. So you give up.
Right.
And then you feel like a failure. And so this is where I come in a lot of times with my clients where they're like, I failed at reintroductions or I couldn't stay low FODMAP. It's like, that's not your fault. It's not meant for you to live on. So anyway, I digress. I just have to say that when someone asks about that. And ultimately the way that I've used paleo and AIP is similarly in the sense that this is a template and I'm going to try it and apply it to my life and see what fits with my body, because bio-individuality, meaning we're all unique, that is like king. That is like the one rule that I would say.
So you believe that you're not, absolutely, 100% you have to be paleo. Everyone is different is what you're saying.
Absolutely. Everyone is different. Try it on like a piece of clothing, give it a good try, but then see what you like about it. See what your body reacts well to it. I don't think everyone needs to give up rice or legumes or even high quality dairy. I don't think everyone needs to give that up. There's a lot of nutrients in there. I just think that it is helpful when, especially you're going through gut issues, you're healing your gut, you have autoimmunity, that you do remove a lot of this stuff, remove the processed food, the sugars, the things that are harder to digest, like maybe grains and legumes and gluten and all that stuff. And then either get support or be really diligent about figuring out reintroductions and what your body likes, and then find your diet. So I follow the Alison diet, whatever I know works well for me, basically.
And so you've tried probably everything under the sun while you were trying to get into remission and stay in remission, right? So let's say like keto, for example, because keto and paleo are kind of like cousins in a sense, that paleo came first and a lot of paleo people transition into keto. And people do it for different reasons. I know people who do keto because they're, help with their cancer, getting into remission, people who are diabetic, people who are on weight loss journeys. Paleo seems to be, for me, a little bit more I don't know, I want to say well-rounded, but it has more, it's applicable to probably more use cases and less stringent. But did you try keto, and how did you find that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I agree. Like keto can be so amazing and so healing for a lot of people. And then you have another spectrum where it could be you eating a block of cheese for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Right? Like you'll always have this spectrum. Same for paleo, where it's like, okay, you're having almond flour, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Like that's going to be hard to digest after a while. So I think keto can be amazing. I think the sort of idea of introducing more healthful fats, when a lot of us grew up in the low fat era and did a number on our bodies by doing that, we really deprived ourselves of essential fatty acids that our body needed. I think that for shedding light on a lot of that, amazing. I think for shedding light on more intermittent fasting and not constantly eating around the clock, which bombards our digestive system. Amazing. I love that it brought that up too. But yeah, it's like anything else where you can misuse a tool or you can use it really well and it can work for you in your life. So I would say, I don't think that I can say I ever went strict keto, but I certainly adopt and like a lot of the principles that I just mentioned, like just including really helpful fats and really minding how you're fasting and minding, like, am I hungry? Do I need to eat right now? Like based on my energy and all this other stuff. So for that, I really love it.
Do you recommend fasting across the board, or is it client by client? You decide based on their situation?
What you just said, client by client. What I normally say, and I normally share what I do, I fast for 14 hours. So I don't do like a 16-hour fast or more, especially because of my thyroid. And since a lot of my clients tend to have at least digestive issues, but since a lot of them do tend to come to me with some thyroid or hormonal imbalances, or be just very stressed out professionals that maybe shouldn't be doing this certain thing, I like to go slower with them instead of saying like, okay, you're going to do a 24-hour fast and then we're going to go do a 16. And I would rather say like, let's find the sweet spot for you. And that's really just by testing. That's the only way you can do it. And the other thing that I'd like to offer up is it doesn't have to always be skipping breakfast, because the only problem with some people can do it really well. But if your blood sugar is a mess, if you got sugar cravings, if you find yourself crashing midday, maybe you want to keep breakfast around a little longer. You want to eat within 2 hours of waking. And so then to fast a good amount, you end your last meal of the day earlier. So
Okay.
I'll stop eating by 6 p.m. I start eating around 8 a.m.
Interesting. I
Does
never,
that make
yeah, I
sense?
haven't heard of that that variation. A lot of times people are like just skip the breakfast and eat later.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
cool. I want to know. I want to get into some. If you have a story of one of your clients that perhaps it was the biggest change, and they came to you in dire straits, and you were able to I don't know how much time it took, but can you sort of walk us through maybe one example if you have offhand of a big transformation that you were able to help with a client?
Yeah. So I can think of one that came to me. She had been diagnosed with Hashimoto's and IBS for several years prior, but then suddenly was catching wind like, oh, maybe I can manage this more with diet and lifestyle, and started sort of seeking out help. So I was sort of running this 4 week reset. Sometimes, I'll do those sporadically throughout the year, where it's kind of foundations. Like I'll have you work on your digestion, work on your blood sugar in a condensed amount of time to really get those results quickly, because that's really helpful to buy into this. Like, oh, if I do this, like this is actually going to work. So we did this 4 week refresh. She was part of that group, and she saw amazing results. Like she started just dropping weight that was just inflammation weight. That wasn't necessarily a goal, but it was weight she could never lose. That's also a struggle with Hashimoto's. Um, her mood, her energy, her sleep, everything improved. Her skin, her digestion. Now, something that was big with her is that she traveled a lot for her work. And this was like pre-COVID, but she was on a plane more than she was home. And that was extremely difficult. So I remember one of the biggest wins after 4 weeks, she was like, I forgot to pack my Imodium AD for the first time. And I used to take that several times a day, every day.
Wow.
And I forgot it in my bag and I didn't even need it. I realized it when I got home and saw it in my cabinet. And I was
Oh
like,
my God.
wow. So that was huge. And then, so because of that, she signed on to work with me for 3 months. We dug deeper. We did some labs, like some stool tests. We dug a little bit deeper. And now I feel like her life is completely changed. She never used to meal prep. She only ever ate out and struggled and took medicine because of her IBS. And she just didn't realize how much she could manage through diet and lifestyle. And now she's like a totally different person, looks different, acts different, her
Yeah.
whole mentality, and it's beautiful. So
Yeah, well, I
that's
mean, it's
probably a good
really
one.
that's a brilliant story. It really is a ball and chain when when you have that, and that story on the plane. I mean, that resonates a lot. I have been there. I've taken the Imodium. I've been on a
Mhm.
12-hour flight from like Tel Aviv to Toronto. Very, very, very bad situation. So when you're able to overcome that, I remember getting on a plane or getting on a long bus ride or something. Even getting to university, I had an hour and a half bus ride in the morning. I mean, it's a journey. It's a journey
And
to
it's a
say the
big
least.
stress because you don't know
Huge.
what your body can handle or what it's going to do, and it's
Yeah.
very stressful, making it all worse.
Yeah. And the sad thing for me, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's sad, but I was, in a sense, like we said earlier in the conversation, I was lucky to be diagnosed, very quickly, and I know what is causing it. But for so many people, they don't even know what's causing it. And
Yeah.
that's the part that's really scary. And when you talk about Hashimoto's, and to think that the doctors couldn't even diagnose that for you, and you went to holistic direction to do that, naturopath. I guess you would recommend to people if they are feeling ill in that way, and if they've gone to the doctor and they're just been going in circles, should they just be booking their appointment with a naturopath immediately?
I would say so. I would
Yeah.
absolutely say so because, again, the difference between a naturopath, a functional medicine doctor versus a Western medicine is that they are more interested in digging for root causes. Even
Right.
when they find a diagnosis, again, they're not stopping there.
Right.
The appointments don't end. Like, let's say I had been diagnosed with one of those endocrinologist visits with Hashimoto's or hypothyroidism. Let's say I had been diagnosed. They would have put me on a small dose of Synthroid and said, I'll see you in 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
False. That is
Mm.
no way to manage Hashimoto's. I've met actually the client I just mentioned to you. That's what she had been doing.
Oh.
And when I told her, like, no, take this slip of paper. I want you to get all these things. tested, take this to a willing doctor. So either you find a really willing, open doctor, which is hard. That's hard. Now you got to talk to it. You got to figure out personality. Will they open up to this? Or yes, you have to go find a naturopath or whatever. She started doing that. And then it became, okay, we need to check your thyroid every 3 months or 1.5 months. It changes.
Right.
And so your medication might need to change. Like, who's checking in on you for that? You can't just be like, cool, I'll see you in a year. I'll see you in 6 months. That's not going to be a way to move you towards health. And so that's the other issue. Again, they're not being rooted in how do we get to remission, or how do we find out the root cause, because as far as they believe, like, no, there's no way to do that. This is forever. So many clients come to me saying, I was just told, like, this is forever. There's nothing I can do. And here's my pill. And I'm like, no,
right.
That is unacceptable. Yes, you are chronically ill. It's always going to be lingering, but you can manage it to where it's not debilitating you day to day, and you feel good again.
Yeah, the body, I do believe the body is made to heal. And I'm always amazed. I mean, I cut my hand the other day biking, because I'm a horrible biker, and apparently I fall all the time. It's very embarrassing. But I cut my hand, and you look at it, and then over time, if you treat it well, it's going to heal. And there's no reason to believe that you can't do the same thing with your gut if you treat it well. Of course, it's not only diet. No one has ever said that it's only diet.
Absolutely.
You want to sleep. You want to move a little bit if you can. There's a book, I haven't read it, but I've seen it referenced in many, many things, called Eat, Move, Sleep. I don't know if you've heard of that before, but I mean, that really encompasses health: eat, move, sleep.
Absolutely.
And when I was trying to get into remission, I remember, I mean, I don't know if it did anything, but I would try my best to stay on my diet. And I would go to the gym, and I do a bunch of ab work. I'm like, if I could get blood in the stomach area.
Wake up!
Yeah, exactly. Maybe it's going to make a difference. And definitely getting some sleep and all of that anyways is going to help reduce stress, right?
Absolutely.
Those are all stress. And when you know that you're eating healthy, you just feel good. I had fish and chips last night at a restaurant. I don't feel great this morning, right? I'm probably not going to do that again today.
Probably.
Probably not. I don't know. It's summer. It's beautiful out here.
I know, right?
So what I'd like to ask you, do you have any horror stories or funny stories from going out to a restaurant and, like, oh my God, they have just ruined it for me? If you don't, that's okay.
I don't think I have any horror stories. I would say,
well, you're lucky.
Something funny that I tend to say, like, have I probably gotten glutened before? Has there maybe been cheese and things when I was like, no, I said no dairy, cheese equals dairy. I think the funniest thing to me is when there's, like, just a 17-year-old hipster waiter in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, that I go to a date night restaurant for. And you would think, like, oh, this is like Williamsburg, Brooklyn. They know what gluten is.
Right.
No, they don't. So, like, so it's like you're sitting there, like, talking to this kid who just doesn't get it. And so sometimes I'm just like, you've got to be, like, are you serious? And it's just funny. I tend to say that a lot on the social medias, and I'm like, instead of arguing with a 17-year-old waiter in Williamsburg, like, that's this hilarious. Is what you got to do. You got to tell them what you can have, go in with a plan, be confident.
Yeah, this is the game plan. You got to be the sergeant general.
Totally.
You have an IGTV video of how to eat while you're on vacation. I know no one's really been on vacation for quite a while, but it might happen soon. And and so do you have any tips for people in terms of finding food and how to have the conversation? Do you just treat every restaurant as a 17-year-old hipster?
Almost. So so I think the best thing you can do, and this is just with anything in life, but certainly when you're traveling, is really be prepared. And so what I do, I've used apps like Foursquare in the past, or Yelp, of course, little things like that, where I research in advance, okay, what's at least gluten-free, what's at least dairy-free. I don't expect a paleo, certainly not any kind of AIP tags to be out there on the interwebs, especially, in years past. But I would at least look at that, like, say, okay, this is my threshold. It's got to be gluten-free, dairy-free. And I would just start to make a list and save the places. And then also look at their menu, cross-check, their website. Really, I'm doing my research. I'm checking their Instagram, all that stuff. And then ultimately, you can also just call up the restaurant before you go.
Right.
and let them know like, hey, I have allergies. That's another big thing. Don't say food sensitivity. They don't know, they don't care. To them that might be like, oh, so then you can have
Right.
it, or
Right.
so you just say allergy.
Right.
And yes, you cannot have that. You can tell them like, oh, it's okay if it's prepared in a gluten containing facility, but I cannot have the gluten or whatever.
Right.
You can tell them that. But I like to just be prepared, let them know what's going on. So by the time I get there, I'm not stressed out. I know that I've primed them probably, or at least I know that if they have a good menu where it says like gluten-free and, has all those little
Yeah.
things, that makes me feel really confident. But
Right.
if I'm traveling to another country that maybe doesn't have that, like I've been to the Caribbean a bunch of times, or, whatever, and they just like, maybe in a lot of those menus, they're not going to have it. So I would rather just call in advance and prepare.
Right.
And then the other thing is like, customer is king. You have to
That's
tell
right.
them what you want. This is your money. This
Right.
is your body. They don't want you to have an allergic reaction. They don't want you to leave a bad review, or worse, like have a lawsuit. So I think telling them what you want, even if you don't look at the menu and you're like, I would like a salad with grilled chicken on it, please. Like that's it.
Right.
I think that that's really key. And then one of my other tips for travel is like, if you can do an Airbnb with your own kitchen, right? Or another thing is a lot of hotels have mini fridges. You just have to ask for it. And they do that because of breastfeeding mothers who need refrigerators. So just as a heads up, a lot of places will have mini fridges. All you have to do is call and ask
That's
for
a
it.
hot tip. That's a hot tip.
Right?
I think a lot of people are going to be using the mini bars for maybe other reasons, but
Yes, exactly. Be like, can you clear out all the mini bottles of tequila and I will just add my like boiled eggs. Thank you.
Hey, well, one thing I want to say before I want to talk about your cookbook, but before I get to the cookbook, I just want to say, when going out to eat, we've done a lot of R&D in the restaurant space, and there's basically like some form, and forgive me for using a political word, but I like to call it almost virtue signaling by some restaurants, where there's just a V and a GF and maybe a VG, and if you're very, very lucky and hit the lotto, there's an NF that stands for nut free. Which nut, we have no idea. But this is sort of meant to, 38% of North Americans actually have some form of restriction. Okay, and I was speaking to someone in a previous episode, and 20% of people apparently have IBS. It sort of seems as though anything beyond, the minimal call of duty of vegan, vegetarian, GF, and frankly, a lot of the times GF doesn't even mean GF because it's cross-contaminated. Do you think there's a massive chasm here, a massive gap that restaurants are not really getting, that there's so many people out there who have issues? Or do you think it's the onus is on the customers to now, let the restaurants know, hey, you guys need to start taking care of us. We don't want to get sick coming to your restaurant anymore.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's so true. And especially when you think about those facts, I wonder if these restaurants are aware of this kind of stuff, like to know that 30x% are having these issues and 20x% are having IBS. And do they buy in that food can be related to that? That people are actually eating there frequently, maybe.
Right.
I remember hearing, I'm going to botch the name. I don't do French accents very well, but it's called Le Pain Quotidien, I want to say. And it's all over like New York and sort of the big cities in the US. I don't know if they're by you, but I think I heard him say, because he opened up a secondary restaurant called Le Botaniste, and it's all like veggie bowls and all these other things. And I remember him being interviewed, and he said, it hit me at some point that people eat my food for breakfast, lunch, dinner, right? We're talking about New York City professionals who don't cook. They are going there because it's on their block of their, company. They have 2 minutes to get something, and they eat there all the time. And he realized, if food is medicine, then I have a moral responsibility to make sure that the food that I'm sourcing is good, to make sure I'm being transparent with people, because that was a big sort of initiative of his, that he would be labeling things.
According to Alison from Food by Mars, true healing can't be hacked. And we agree with her. It requires time, attention, commitment, and real advice that's tailored to you and your situation. If you want to start the healing journey, it's best to have an experienced guide. So if you're ready to learn how to eat uniquely for your own body, and you're ready for your body to eat healthy again, then you need to head over to foodbymars.com and start listening to what your intuition already knows and wants. Sign up for Alison's free newsletter and free 20-minute meal prep system. You can also follow Alison on Instagram at Food by Mars. Once again, that is foodbymars.com. Go check it out.
So I just remember hearing him say that and sort of take it so seriously. And that was refreshing because I had never heard of anyone care so much like that.
Right.
I just don't think a lot of people realize it that way. I don't think people always buy into food as medicine. And hey, I have clients or patrons or whatever, customers that eat here regularly. And what am I sort of helping them put into their body?
Right.
So I do think there's responsibility on both sides. If you want to sort of have good business practices and you have a passion for your restaurant and feeding people, hopefully you can realize that food is very much tied to your health. It's what you're putting in your body 3 times a day. Why wouldn't it be? But then from our own personal responsibility standpoint, we do have to stand up. We can't just feel bad. This is what I always hear from people, and I'm sure you probably hear it too or have felt it. I don't want to go to a restaurant and be that person.
Yep.
I don't want to be the person that's arguing with a waiter or saying, please, can this be gluten-free? Can you leave that off my plate? Can you add this? And I always just empower people like, what person is that? The person who is paying for what they're getting and wants to make sure what they're getting is what they can actually eat. And so they're not sick for 48 hours after? Or is it the person that you foresee or think, perceive is the word I'm trying to get at, as being like annoying and like a little bit of a like entitled or something like that, because that's not what it has to be.
Right.
I think it's very much in your attitude and delivery. But again, if you're prepared, you look in advance, maybe you call and give them a heads up, or you selectively pick these places that you feel like more confident that you can eat at. That's going to go a long way. And then, just have the conversation. Don't be scared. If your friends or family or whoever you're dining with is peer pressuring you, like,
well, that's
you have
not
to
good.
put that out of your head.
You definitely I think the onus is definitely on both. And you're right. We need to be a little bit brave when it comes to it. But I have had some horror stories with restaurants in my company where I'd call a restaurant and say, hey, we're actually going to give you this software for free. And you can just sign up here, and they'd email me back and say, we put restrictive ingredients and allergens in our food on purpose. Literally, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, and so
that's next level.
Yeah, and so I think to some degree there is a taboo. I know many servers, and they say, when somebody orders something with modifications, there's like whispers and laughs in the kitchen. And so I think to a certain degree, what we're seeing is like this very subtle like social issue in a sense. And it's a little bit disappointing because, a lot of these people who are asking for gluten-free, it's not because they read it in some article and they're trying to be stylish or something. It's literally because they're having issues with their body and they're just trying to test something out, or they've been diagnosed. And so I think, if people knew, if there were microphones listening in a lot of the conversations, I think we would all be really surprised. So I would say, people need to be brave. And of course, there are many companies and people out there who are advocating. You're obviously advocating. We're doing our best to advocate. And I think this is going to become more and more prevalent, and people understand. The minute a family member is all of a sudden going to get diagnosed with something or have an issue, you might not have that same attitude anymore. And with 38%, it's a matter of time before someone in your circle is going to be affected by it. But anyways, on to brighter subjects.
This just took a dark turn. No, I'm kidding. That doesn't surprise me because think about big food, right? Like that refuses to take out these hyper palatable ingredients that they know is going to affect their bottom line. If they don't have people addicted to their ingredients, to their product, how will they keep selling it?
Right.
So it does make sense. It is what you said. It's sad.
And so what I want I want listeners to be able to check you out. And it seems like you have a couple ways. Obviously, you have your website, foodbymars.com. That's MARS. But you also have a cookbook that just came out. And it's called the Paleo Gut Healing Cookbook. Can you tell us a little bit more about the cookbook? Is this the pitch for paleo? Do people need to know about paleo before they get the cookbook, or can they just wing it and learn in that book?
Oh yeah, beginners are welcome. Totally welcome in that book. So really the idea behind the book is it's what you eat, how you eat, why you eat. I really try to include all of it because of everything we spoke about here. Diet is a huge piece, but there is a social aspect to it, right? How you
Right.
feel, how other people might be perceiving you, even though we maybe like to think we don't care how people think about us. I know that we do. So little things like that, but also the way we eat, which we didn't, cover here. It's a totally different segue topic, but mindful eating, slowing down, managing that stress. It's kind of the linchpin of when I said to you, I had to figure out the Allison diet. I used these templates, but then how did I figure out, oh, I can have this. Oh, I can have this in some moderation. That's how
Got it.
I started tuning in more into my body. So I do talk a lot about that in the book. So I have a 2 week like gut refresh meal plan in there, and it does a lot of the like eliminating while healing the gut that I had mentioned,
Got it.
as well as I kind of cover the 10 top strategies that I've seen in my personal health and in my practice to really help. So mindful eating, certain fasting things that we talked about, and some other tips that really move the needle with gut health. But yeah, anyone is welcome to that book. I think you'll get a lot out of it.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks fantastic, and I love how paleo in the past. It seemed to be for me, sort of a I don't know, like not a I don't want to say trend, but a lot of people were doing it for fitness reasons and for
Hmm.
this and that. But I love the fact that gut healing is the emphasis. I think it's
Yeah.
super important to emphasize that. And so, if people do want to work with you as well, because I know that you do work one on one too, as we've discussed. Do you do that only in the States? Is that where you're licensed to do it, or is it people from Canada and other countries could also contact you?
Yeah, I can actually do it with anyone. So
Okay.
yeah, Canada, I've had clients internationally in Sweden and random countries that are amazing. So yeah, anyone can kind of reach out to me for one-on-one where I really dig deep with you on your symptoms and figure out your you diet.
Awesome. That's super exciting. Allison, is there anything else that you want to cover before we wrap up?
No, oh my God, we covered so much. This was great, and I again just have to say that I love what you're doing because there is this social issue, social anxieties that I always see as a downfall for my clients. And I'm always
Right,
coaching them through how can you go out and sort of have your cake and eat it too.
right.
And there's certainly so many of the tips that we talked about here, but what you're doing is just going to bring so much more confidence and ease and open up the world again for people. So I just love it.
That's very kind of you to say, and I think we both share similar missions. And we just want people to feel better at the end of the
Yeah.
day, no matter what their restrictions are and anything like that. So, Allison Marras, thank you very much. Food by Mars. She's a nutritional therapy practitioner, and we were so happy to have her on the podcast. It's a pleasure meeting you, seeing you, and talking to you.
You too. Thank you.